Hey there, today we're gonna take a look at a concept that you can find in this book, Jazz Theory Resources by Bert Ligon. I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. I'm gonna pronounce it French, Bert Ligon, because I'm from Europe, so give me a break. This is a concept that we're gonna use to help us improvise over changes, namely autumn leaves. So before I give you this concept, I'm gonna set it up. So I'm gonna pretend that I'm a jazz guitar student who is kind of struggling with how to play over changes. I know some of you watching are really advanced players. Judging by the comments I get sometimes, I know that I have viewers that are real jazz nerds, and you know who you are. But sometimes people approach me for lessons and stuff. Somebody who maybe isn't super advanced, but more in the beginning stage of things. So if you are a super advanced player, this might be a little bit of an easy thing for you, but I'm still gonna try to apply it in a more advanced concept too. And then it's also really, really good for teaching. So if you are an advanced player, you might also be a teacher, right? So this is a really good way to get the student to understand how to improvise over changes. So if you think that sounds like a good idea, let's go. So we're gonna practice improvising over the A section of Autumn Leaves. So I'm just gonna make a little backing track for myself with my loop pedal. And when I'm comping, I'm just playing the guide tones, right? The third and the seventh of each chord. So C minor, F7, and then B flat major to E flat major. And I'm adding the bass note. The G minor, I'm gonna use the sixth as a guide tone rather than the flat seven. Because, I mean, you could use either or, but I like the sixth because it's a tonic minor sound. The flat seven gives the minor chord more of a subdominant feel to it, but I like the sixth. So maybe throw in a little bit of walking bass, but not strict walking bass, because that's kind of, to me, it's more of a solo guitar technique. But maybe something like this. There's a little loop. Alright, so now we're going to try to solo over that. So normally you would, a beginner student would just play B flat major, G minor. And we all know that's not gonna cut it, right? Because we're not outlining the harmony. So the most common problem beginner improvising students have when they're coming to me is that they're not outlining the harmony. I need to hear the chords go by even if nobody is playing the chords behind the soloist. So obviously there are different techniques that can help you do that. The teacher might tell you to play chord scales. So Dorian, Mixolydian, Major, Lydian, Locrian, and then maybe Phrygian major, and then melodic minor. So that would sound like this. One more time. So that's very basic, right? So if that's where you are, you have a long journey ahead of you, and that shouldn't be discouraging. That just means that you're at the beginning of the journey rather than at the end of the journey. It could be discouraging if you have a test coming up, something, or a gig tomorrow or something, but you shouldn't be discouraged if you think that, oh my god, there's so much work to do. You should welcome the work, I think. But obviously, this is not really cutting it. We're just playing scales, we're practicing, we're not improvising, we're not doing anything interesting. We're playing chord by chord rather than over the changes, right? And some of you might ask, why did you pick those scales? You could pick other scales, but those are the scales that I like because they kind of define those chords and how they relate to the key, right? So you could play a different altered scale for the altered dominant chord and the G minor. I picked melodic minor because that's it's a tonic minor sound, rather than if I play Dorian of the G minor, that gives it a subdominant sound, and it's not a subdominant, it's tonic. And if I play Aeolian, it's a little bit too dark, and you have the avoid notes. So that's why we tend to play melodic minor on minor chords when the minor chord is a tonic, meaning we're in the key of G minor. Okay, so then the next thing to do is to play arpeggios, just broken 4-part chords. G minor 6 there. Again, that's very basic, right? So some of you are thinking, when are you gonna get to the concept from the book? Hang on. Patience. Again, we're playing like chord, chord, chord. You could say that we're playing kind of vertically. We want to play this way, not chord, next chord, next chord. You know what I mean? So there's one more thing you should do before you do this. So soon I'll get to the concept, and that's bob scales. So I've made many videos on bob scales. You can go back into my archives and watch those if you don't know what those are. But you could play a F mixo bob scale over the first 2 bars, a B flat major bob scale over the second or the third and the fourth bar, and then D mixo flat 9 or Phrygian major bob scale over the next 2 bars, and G melodic minor bob scale. So I'm moving kind of fast here because I'm assuming that most of you are aware of this stuff and you can always find information about this, right? So I'm thinking of the chords as 2 like pairs. So the first 2 bars is one thing and the next 2 is one thing. So that would sound like this. Okay, and by the way, I will be putting the tabs and the notation on my Patreon page. So now that's a little bit better because at least you're connecting 2 chords, right? But let's say you've done all this and you can do all this, but you're still not, it's like, when am I gonna play music? When it's gonna sound like jazz? The next thing you need to be aware of then is that you need to be aware of the guide tones. The guide tones is what's moving the harmony. So it's B flat to E flat, right? A to E flat, A to D, G to D. And I haven't made a video in the past on how you can kind of make music. It's hard to make music with just the guide tones, but you can if you kind of embellish them and stuff. So see, it is possible to make music using the just guide tones, but this concept, melodic outlines, common melodic outlines, is an idea that focuses in on the guide tones, and you create little melodies that target the guide tones, that starts and ends on the guide tones. There are 3 of them. Outline number 1, number 2, and number 3. I'm gonna give you outline number 1 for 2 reasons. First, I don't want to make a video that's 2 hours long, and then secondly, as always, I don't want to give away everything in the book because, you know, this is copyright material and I'm giving you an idea of the stuff that is in this book. So this is not a jazz guitar book, method book, it's a jazz theory book. And there's tons of stuff, and there's also another volume. This is a very thick book. This is just 1 chapter in this book. But it kind of stands out because I haven't really seen this in any other book. So what is this concept? Well, if I'm starting on one of the guide tones, the E flat of the C minor, and play the scale down to the 3rd of the next chord. Right? Do the same thing with the next 2 chords. And then I just play the scale of the G minor. You could kind of imagine that there's a C there. C7. Sounds like this. Some people throw in a G7 at the end there, so you could also do kind of change it around to start on the 2nd chord. Sharp 9. Okay, and some of you are noticing that it's actually a tune, right? It's Fly Me to the Moon. So now you're thinking, what? That's it? That's nothing. That's the point. It's a very, very simple concept. That's why it's so brilliant. We need to go back to the book and read what he says here in the beginning of this chapter. He lists a bunch of reasons why this is a really good idea to work on this stuff. They are excellent tools for teaching beginning improvisers for several reasons. And then there's a list of reasons. 1, students learn melodic patterns. not just scales and arpeggios. So this is actually a musical phrase, right? It's a melodic idea rather than just scales and arpeggios, which just sounds like you're in the practice room. Students learn the connection between the chords, voice leading. Those are the notes that connects the chord, the B flat falling to that A, right? That's what you want to bring out in your lines when you're soloing. Not all the time, but you want to be able to do that. Students move away from thinking root to root approaches to harmony. So before we were playing, starting on the root. But again, the harmony is not, that's not how the harmony is moving really. This is where the harmony is happening, or the movement is happening. So instead of focusing on the root all the time, I'm focusing on or even. Okay, so the student learns to think about where the lines are going rather than just where the lines are. Thinking about each individual chord and scale leads to the opposite. Thinking about where they are and not where they're going. So it gives the lines a direction. Gives a student another vehicle to learn their instruments. Practicing scales and arpeggios is absolutely necessary for students to learn their instruments. But these outlines enhance the learning process by adding the dimension of melodic direction. There you have it. And then finally, the most important point that we're gonna get to right now. Students can learn and apply all types of devices for melodic invention, embellishment, notes, neighbor notes, passing tones, arpeggiated tones, octave displacement, chromatic approaches, sequencing, augmentation, fragmentation, and other musical techniques. So, because this idea is so simple in a way, it's easy to add things to it. Improvising. So you can easily embellish this idea in many different ways. For example, now we're playing it as quarter notes. Imagine I diminish the rhythm, right? And play as eighth notes instead. We get this. I think you see where I'm going with this. All of a sudden there's a space, there is room for us to add things. So for example, I could play it rhythmically different. I could anticipate the rhythm, or I could target the first note from above, the scale above. Or from below. I'm sure you can come up with more ways to change that melody and still keep the important parts, is that transition. Then that was changing the first part of the first chord tone, right? You could also embellish the second chord tone, that one that you're targeting. If I, for example, approach that chromatically from below, would sound like this. You might want to change rhythmically. The idea is that there's room for improvisation. You can change it rhythmically and add embellishments, chromatic notes and targeting notes. Change octaves. There are many ways you could change octaves, right? I'm sure you could come up with your own little things to change it, which is great because then you're actually adding the element of improvisation. Whereas before you were just playing scales and arpeggios. And I mean, you can improvise with arpeggios too, but it's actually really, really hard to do, right? So this is a little bit easier. And you can still hear the chords, where you totally hear the chords. Okay, let's say you want to add on an arpeggio to the first note of the second bar. Something you could do is you can do an octave displacement there. Instead of going up, I go down. I'm gonna play the whole thing an octave higher. And then resolve it. Now all of a sudden it starts to sound like a bebop. So that's basically playing that idea and adding the approach notes. Approaching the third from chromatically from below, and then the arpeggio, but dropping it an octave. Resolving it. And then the arpeggio again, dropping it an octave. So instead of, I go. I think Barry Harris calls that pivot, the pivot technique. All of a sudden, I'm playing bebop. That's why it's also important to listen to jazz. Don't just learn this from a book or because I'm saying this. So for example, this thing, that kind of thing. The pivot technique, Grant Green does that all the time, and it's a Charlie Parker thing, I guess. So I've lifted Grant Green solos, so when I see this, it's nothing new to me. I can put it in context. That's why you need to listen to jazz and transcribe solos. That's why I try to make some of my videos transcription videos. Right now I'm working on a Kurt Rosenwinkel solo, which is taking forever because it's really hard to hear what the hell he's playing. But hopefully there will be a Kurt Rosenwinkel transcription solo video pretty soon. So that's basically the idea. So if you're an advanced player, I recommend that you take a tune that is harder. And I should mention, of course, that this technique works over tunes that move in fifths or fourths. Cycle of fifths or circle of fifths or whatever. Cycle of fifths. So all the things you are, autumn leaves, fly me to the moon. But you could, any 2/5 based tune. So you could take a more tricky 2/5 based tune like Moment's Notice or Lazy Bird. Lazy Bird is a good one. Try this technique over Lazy Bird and you will see that it can really help with that kind of tune as well. So let's say, for example, you want to use this technique to go get outside of the harmony a little bit. C minor, F7, next chord, I could treat that as a dominant going to E flat. So I treat the B flat as a dominant going to E flat. That means I can use the sub 5. The sub 5 is E, and the related tune to E is B7, B minor 7. So I can play C minor 7, F7, B minor 7, E7, E flat. That's a kind of common thing to do actually. A chromatic 2/5s, right? So I'll make a little backing track with those chords. So you see, you can also use that little phrase or phrases like that over the chromatic 2/5s or 2/5s that are kind of superimposed over the regular changes for the advanced player. Okay, so then there's one thing I haven't mentioned, and it's that the fact that sometimes it's a dominant chord going to a dominant chord rather than a minor chord going to a. So for example, if you have this kind of progression, C7, F7, B flat 7, E flat 7. For example, the tune Jordu has that kind of progression. So then it would be, the same technique would be different. You would have to change it to accommodate those chords. So I made a little etude for the tune Jordu, where I apply this technique to that kind of chord progression. I'll make an extra bonus video, short bonus video for my patrons, and I'll put this on my Patreon page with no extra charge. So a little bit of housekeeping. Big thank you as always to my patrons. Somebody approached me and thought that you had to pay $100 to be a patron, and the minimum charge for being a patron is $1. $1. $100 would be a lot. If people supported me with $100 per video, I would sit here with Hollywood studio production gear, right? So I'm using the money I'm getting from the Patreon to buy stuff to improve the video. I'm not, that's not money that I use for my own entertainment. So I just ordered a new microphone, for example, and I bought a video camera that I'm using now and lighting gear with one which broke when I had to move the other day. But so again, big thank you to my patrons, and also the whole live streaming thing is a little bit on hold because the Wi-Fi in my new place here is not really reliable for that, so I might have to wait a little bit with that. Also, the patrons, I'm charging for, if you're thinking about becoming a Patreon, I'm charging for lesson videos. So every other week I release a lesson video, and the other weeks I release a performance video, and I don't charge for that, right? It's only for the lessons, so bi-weekly. And if I were to change that and increase, I don't think I will do that, but let's say I wanted to make a lesson a week, I would let you know beforehand so that you are aware of that. So with all that, PDFs on my Patreon page, and I hope that lesson was helpful. The book is Jazz Theory Resources. I went over one technique called Melodic Outlines, and there are 2 more of those in this book with tons of stuff that is useful for anybody who is interested in jazz. So I shall see you next time. Thanks for watching.